Hello, and welcome to Name the Studio. I'm your host, Tyler. Today we're going to be starting a new piece in the theme of the video game series The Last of Us. For those of you unfamiliar, The Last of Us is a video game series that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, really much like Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Very depraved humanity is left, some despicable, gross people roam for their own self-interest. Very bleak and hard world. But the developers of this video game, Naughty Dog, decided that that wasn't quite harsh enough. So they added fungal zombies into the mix for this game. So we have these very grotesque creatures that have sort of fungal growths popping out of them, like you see here. So, with that in mind, we will dive more into these topics as we get into it. But for now, we're going to start a new 5x7 piece in the theme of these kind of odd, disgusting fungal creatures. We'll see what happens. Alright, so today we're really going to focus on the base layer of this piece more than anything else before we even put down any encaustic medium. So what we're starting out here with is I have coated the Gessobord with the Caran Neocolor Pastel 2, just the black. And now I am taking some water to it and just sort of brushing it out, trying to get rid of any of the crayon marks and just getting a nice wash of that black over top of this. So I'm going to be going back and forth over it a couple of ways just to mitigate any of those gestural lines that we would see. So we're going in a very different direction to start with on this piece than any of the previous ones, starting with a hard black background rather than keeping it the neutral white. So what I'm doing at the moment is we're just slowly building on this layer because we don't want it to be a nebulous black. We want it to be more of a kind of worn down, washed out sort of black to sort of mimic the feel of this world that a lot of the world that we're familiar with, sort of the urban nature of our society has been worn down to next to nothing. So, and then overgrown with nature, plant life, fungus, this sort of thing. So we don't want a just hard, flat black. We want something that feels like it's been around for a while. This feels like it's seen some wear and tear, and definitely has some age to it. So that's why we're slowly just working back a little bit, pulling little bits of this Neo-Pastel away as I am using paper towel and some X-Acto knife to sort of just give it some wear aspects. Right now I'm just taking an X-Acto knife through the actual crayon to just give a couple marks that really aren't going to be terribly noticeable when we're all said and done, but does give a little bit more idea of some wear and some marking happening on this piece overall. And also sort of to inform just a little bit about what the sort of composition will be. Also, and then it's nice to have a couple guidelines as you build and work to kind of help keep things a little bit more situated. So now I'm really going to take that paper towel. Now that that base layer has really dried in there, I can start to scrub away without fear of scrubbing away all the way back to white. Unless I add water. If I add water, I could probably scrub it back to white. But without water, it's really just sort of scrubbing out sort of that top layer. And so we'll get more of this sort of gray toned, a little bit more scrubbed out sort of feel from what we're seeing here. So at this point we have a nice kind of, not quite gradient, but definitely worn out sort of dark gray tone happening right now. that will definitely darken as we put some layers and whatnot on top of it. But I feel like this is a good base layer for this piece at this point. Now, before we actually get to the straight encaustic medium base layer, we are going to add just a little bit of straight pigmented encaustic paint. Sometimes I like to put it down on the base layer because once you put that down, because you're putting it on the gessoed surface rather than the encaustic medium, it doesn't move quite the same. It doesn't have that fluidity as it does when it's starting to mix with that base medium. So you can get harsher line elements when you just put it directly onto the substrate because it just sort of grips and doesn't really move as much. So you don't get so much of a nice wash line. You get harsher, sort of quicker little movements in your brush. So those are nice little aspects to kind of have in here on this base layer when we're really trying to create some odd dynamic between these sort of soft worn-in aspects and a little bit more aggressive gestural elements that we're still going to wear down a little bit, but we want aspects of those in there. So I'm going to take the butane torch and just sort of fuse this lightly in here. The other thing I'm doing while I'm fusing this this little bit of layer in here is I use the Gessobord instead of the encaustic board. The differences between them are slight, but enough. One, the encaustic board is a little thicker than the Gessobord, and the other thing is the encaustic board has a heat-resistant gesso on it, while the regular Gessobord doesn't have that heat-resistant aspect to it. Mind you, I've never really had any issue with the non-heat resistant encaustic gesso. You really have to put a torch to it quite closely and for quite some time to really start to see what the difference is going to be. And because of that, I actually like using the regular Gessobord because I can overheat the board just a little bit to actually cause some bubbling in the actual gesso, which can create some really interesting textures and marks and pops when you start to layer encaustic medium on top of it. So sometimes I do actually like to overheat the Gessobord to get some sort of interesting sort of like bubbling fissures going on, which is quite interesting at times. So now I'm taking the X-Acto knife. Well, the black is still quite hot actually. So a lot of this I'm actually just kind of moving that encaustic around. When it's that hot, you're not really scraping everything up, you're actually just pushing that encaustic around a little bit more. So some of them are just pushing completely off the substrate, some of it I'm just pushing it into more concise areas. But we're just sort of toning down some of this black element here, wearing it down just a little bit more to, again, we want a lot of texture happening on this base layer to start with for this piece, where we want to play with a lot of textural elements going on overall. Again, lots of little details happening here and there, but without being too busy. So we want to bury a lot of those elements rather than having them really on the forefront, like some of the other pieces. So now I'm just taking a paper towel to this, just to, again, wear stuff out a little bit. At this point, the overall encaustic still isn't completely dry. So as I'm going over it with the paper towel, I'm actually pulling some of that still away. So I'm getting some odd little outlines where sort of the hot and the cold aspect of the encaustic meets. So this is just adding a little bit more texture overall to that more sort of dark, saturated area in the middle. We want to tone that back a little bit for the very beginning. So this is what we now have for kind of our base layer, with, again, just using the Neocolor and just a little bit of intense carbon black encaustic brick. And now we're going to go ahead and put down our actual base layer of straight encaustic medium. With that, again, I like using this brush. It's a little bit smoother, gives a nice mark. We want the brush to be hot, so we keep on brushing it against the griddle to make sure the bristles are hot along with the wax, so we get nice smooth even strokes as we're applying said medium. We want a very thin layer here because we do want a lot of this detail to show through as we're working. So I'm doing a very quick thin coat of the encaustic medium for this base layer, which we're now going to, this one we're actually going to fuse quite thoroughly to the actual base. Again, partly because we want to be very transparent, we want it to be very even. We don't want spots that are going to have any more wax than another. So the more you heat it, the more the wax is starting to sort of wash and fuse over itself. So the longer you fuse it, the more even that layer is going to be, so long as you are very even about how you're torching your substrate. So that's why I'm kind of going over everything 2 or 3 times at this point, just to make sure that it is nice, even, and thin. So, and as you can see, as it dries a little bit, you start to see kind of wax pockets and whatnot appear slightly, and then they might actually disappear once they cool even more. So it's always nice to give your piece a little bit of time, especially after that first firing, if you have a good base layer down there, because it can affect the visuals while it's drying. It can be a little tricky to find exactly what your overall product's going to be if you don't give it enough dry time. So there are a couple little spots in here that definitely held a little bit more wax than others. So right now I'm just sort of burnishing those back with an X-Acto knife, just to get, again, a nice even coat overall, which looks like we finally do at this point. And that's going to be all for us this time. As you can see today, we really just focused on getting a good base layer down. By the end of it, we really just had that base coat of encaustic medium down. Over the next few sessions, we're definitely going to be building out the actual subject matter. But we are going to be diving into some more advanced techniques with the encaustic mediums. So that is why we are taking things just a little bit slower as we go. So with that in mind, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe to Nameless Studio. As always, I've been Tyler. Be seeing you.